Even the most skilled hunters can become the hunted. From a mother crushed beneath a brown bear in Alaska's icy rivers to a furious buck slashing through snow in Wisconsin, from polar bears charging snowmobiles in Svalbard to a grizzly tearing through a midnight cabin, from a moose pinning its prey in Maine's bogs to a black bear turning a pickup into a death trap. These stories prove nature shows no mercy. Watch till the end, because survival here is never guaranteed. In November 2016, the Yukon Delta lay under a heavy curtain of fog, the snow-dusted wilderness eerily silent except for the crunch of boots pressing into the frozen ground. Harper Clark, an experienced hunter, moved cautiously along the icy creek with her son Eli, who followed a few steps behind. The air was bitterly cold, every breath rising in pale clouds, and the sound of the water beneath the thin ice carried faintly through the stillness. They were tracking a massive brown bear that had roamed the area for years, a predator that locals spoke of with awe and fear. The narrow crossing they faced was slick, the surface broken by jagged edges of ice, forcing them to balance carefully with each step. Beneath the fog, the wilderness seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a violent instant, the silence shattered. Out of the mist, a monstrous figure surged forward, a brown bear of terrifying size, weighing nearly 1,400 pounds. Its breath steamed in the air, its eyes locked on the pair with cold focus. Harper barely had time to lift her .375 H&H, the heavy rifle she trusted, before the beast closed the distance. With a thunderous impact, the predator slammed into her, sending her crashing backward into the freezing water. Her body struck against submerged rocks, and the icy current swept her partially downstream as claws ripped through her jacket and into her flesh. Eli's heart pounded as he lifted his .3006, aiming at the hulking mass pinning his mother. The shot rang out, striking the predator's shoulder, snow exploding around them from the force. Yet the animal only roared, staggering but not stopping, its strength undiminished by the bullet. Blood from its wound mixed with the cold spray of the creek, but its fury drove it on. Eli fired again and again, each blast echoing across the valley, hitting the chest and flank, but the brown bear's bulk absorbed the impact. Harper struggled beneath the crushing weight, her hands clawing at the current as the freezing water dragged across her face. Her muffled cries were swallowed by the roar of the predator and the rush of the stream. The young hunter screamed as he pressed closer, his arms shaking as he reloaded, trying to force the animal back. He could see the blood staining the water, but the predator's massive body still pinned his mother against the stones. Her strength was slipping fast, the icy flow weakening her as much as the wounds already carved into her body. The predator finally staggered, its breathing ragged, but the moments that mattered most were already gone. Harper's motion slowed, her rifle lost beneath the current. With a final heave, the bear pulled back, lumbering toward the fog, its wounded body vanishing into the white void. Eli fell to his knees in the freezing water, reaching for her limp form. The current lapped against them both, carrying fragments of ice downstream. Despite his frantic efforts, Harper's chest no longer rose, her body still against the cold stones. The vast Yukon Delta, silent once more, bore witness to the horrifying power of Alaska's apex predator, leaving only grief and terror in its wake. Eli knelt in the freezing creek, clutching the body that moments earlier had fought with every ounce of strength. The water rushed around him, carrying blood and fragments of ice downstream as the fog thickened once more, swallowing the path the predator had taken. His breath came in ragged bursts, every exhale clouding in the bitter air, his body shaking as much from grief as from cold. The weight of what had just unfolded pressed on him, heavier than the rifle still clutched in his trembling hands. The wilderness was utterly silent now, as though it too recoiled from the violence that had erupted. Eli forced himself to drag Harper's body from the current to the edge of the bank, laying her across the frozen ground. Her jacket was torn to ribbons, her skin marked with wounds that told the story of the savage power that had overwhelmed her. He tried to cover her with what remained of a blanket from their pack, though he knew the gesture offered no comfort to her now. Hours passed before the distant sound of engines broke the silence. A search team, alerted after the pair had missed scheduled contact, arrived with snowmobiles and emergency gear. The rescuers rushed to the boy, their faces grim as they understood what had happened. They loaded Harper's body onto a stretcher, wrapping it in tarps. while Eli sat in shock, barely able to speak. His rifle lay on the bank where he had dropped it, the barrel blackened with the residue of desperate shots. The group carried him to the nearest outpost where medical staff treated his frostbitten hands and checked the bruises from his fall. Physically, he would recover, but his eyes told a different story. The memory of the moment when the predator burst through the fog and crushed the life out of his mother was carved too deeply to fade. He spoke little, his silence a wall against the flood of emotions clawing inside. News of the attack spread quickly through the region, reaching towns and villages where hunters gathered. Many knew Harper as a skilled outdoors woman who respected the wilderness, and the shock of her death rippled like a cold wind. Authorities reminded all that even the most experienced could fall victim to the sheer force of the giants that roamed Alaska. They emphasized that fog, ice, and the lure of food could align in a deadly way, leaving little chance for survival. Eli remained under the care of relatives in the weeks that followed, but sleep often failed him. Each night he saw the mist, heard the roar, and felt the helpless weight of time slipping away as his mother vanished beneath the predator's fury. He had faced the apex beast with courage far beyond his years, yet courage had not been enough to turn the tide. The Yukon Delta remained vast, cold, and indifferent, its fog concealing predators that moved with silent purpose. For those who dared to walk its frozen ground, Harper's story became a somber reminder that in this land strength and skill could be shattered in seconds, leaving only loss behind. November 2024 settled cold and sharp over the deep woods of northern Wisconsin, where frost coated every branch and mist wound itself through the trunks like pale smoke. Colin Barrett and Mara Lewis moved carefully along a narrow trail, their boots crunching over frozen leaves, with Scout, their Labrador, close at their heels. The dog had hunted these woods before, steady and reliable, his nose lifting to catch faint scents as the silence of the forest hung heavy around them. The two hunters searched for signs of a massive buck known to roam this range, its antlers rumored to branch wide into 12 points. The morning was still, the air brittle with cold, when Scout suddenly stiffened. His ears perked and he broke into a run, his bark echoing off the frosted trunks. The mist split as he bounded forward, nose close to the ground, following a trail none of them could see. Colin and Mara quickened their pace, rifles ready, eyes darting through the haze. Then movement appeared in the shadows. The great buck, its body tall and thick, muscles rippling beneath its winter coat. The animal's head turned sharply, eyes bright, antlers gleaming with frost. Scout's barking grew louder, closing the distance, but the buck did not flee. Instead, it wheeled and lowered its head, hooves digging into the frozen earth. With explosive speed, it surged forward, antlers aimed with dangerous precision. The dog yelped as the sharp tines struck his side, sending him tumbling across the ice-crusted ground. His body skidded against roots and rocks before coming to rest, whining in pain. Mara rushed forward without hesitation, dropping to pull Scout back, but the buck was already turning. Its antlers swept low, one tip tearing through her jacket and slicing into the flesh of her arm. She cried out, clutching the wound as blood seeped through the fabric, staining the white frost. Colin's hands tightened on his rifle and he lifted it quickly, firing a warning shot into the air. The crack of the .270 echoed, the bullet striking close enough to make the buck stumble, yet its focus never wavered. The deer circled, hooves scraping against ice, head lowered once more, steam rising from its nostrils. Its body heaved with raw force, the sound of its breath mixing with the growls of Scout, who, though injured, still barked weakly at his attacker. Mara dragged the dog back against her chest, her face pale with cold and fear. For a tense stretch of moments, no one moved, the predator-like focus of the buck locking on its chosen target. Colin steadied himself, sighting the rifle once more, the mist curling around his shoulders as the scene froze in a deadly standstill. His breath rose in white clouds, his finger firm on the trigger. The buck pawed at the ground, ready for another charge. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next violent clash. Colin steadied his aim as the buck scraped the frozen ground, its antlers glinting in the mist, its body coiled with fury. With Scout whimpering in Mara's arms and the deer preparing for another charge, there was no time to hesitate. He pulled the trigger, the rifle cracking like thunder through the trees. The shot struck deep into the chest, forcing the beast to stagger backward, its legs slipping against the ice. Still, it fought to rise again, muscles straining, eyes burning with wild rage. The woods erupted with sound as the buck wheeled erratically, antlers slicing through brush and branches, scattering frost into the air. Colin held his ground, reloading swiftly, ready for another strike if it dared to advance. Mara pressed one hand to her bleeding arm, the other clutching Scout tightly, whispering silent prayers as the animal's labored breathing filled the clearing. For long seconds, it seemed as though the brute would launch again, determined to finish the fight. But its strength was draining. The powerful body quivered, foam at its mouth turning pink as blood spread across its hide. One final lunge carried it forward, antlers gouging into the frozen soil just short of Colin. The ground shook with the impact. Then the forest went quiet as the massive form collapsed into stillness. Frost clung to its fur as steam lifted from the fresh wound, and the sound of its fall echoed long after it was gone. Silence lingered before Mara let out a shaky breath, clutching Scout against her chest as his tail gave a weak thump. Colin lowered the rifle, shoulders heavy with the weight of what had just unfolded. He hurried to Mara's side, helping her to stand, his eyes darting across the wound that bled freely down her arm. They tore strips of cloth from spare clothing to wrap the cut, binding it tight enough to slow the bleeding. Scout whimpered softly, his body bruised but bones intact, eyes flicking nervously toward the fallen buck. Together they steadied themselves, gathering what gear had scattered during the chaos. The frosted forest, once beautiful and serene, now felt menacing, every shadow holding the memory of the violent charge. Step by careful step, they began the long walk back toward camp, Colin supporting Mara, Scout limping at their side. The air carried only the sound of their breaths and the faint crunch of ice beneath their boots. When they finally reached their base, the full shock set in. Mara's wound required stitches, but she was alive, and Scout would recover with rest. Word of the attack spread quickly among guides and hunters in the region, many shaken by the tale. Experts later explained that mature bucks guarding young can be as fierce as any predator, their instincts sharpened when they sense danger to their family. The memory of that morning would not fade easily. Frost still covered the trees, but for Colin and Mara, the forest no longer held only beauty. It held the echo of hooves, the crash of antlers, and the reminder that even familiar ground can turn deadly in a heartbeat. In March 2023, the frozen wilds of Norway's Svalbard archipelago were covered in thick, swirling snow, the kind that blinds even the most seasoned traveler. Hunters Eric Johansson and Sven Larsson rode their snowmobiles carefully across the vast ice, their goal to track Arctic foxes that had left faint prints in the drifts. The whiteout made it hard to see more than a few yards ahead, and every groan from the ice beneath them carried a warning. As the machines cut a narrow path across the frozen expanse, a massive shadow began to form in the fog. Out of the haze, a full-grown polar bear weighing nearly 1,200 pounds came into view, its bulk moving with frightening speed. The predator's black eyes locked onto the hunters, its powerful paws cracking the ice as it advanced. The storm swallowed every sound except for the roar of the wind and the growls rolling from the bear's chest. Sven tried to steer away from a jagged fissure forming across the surface, but the predator lunged with terrifying strength. The impact sent his snowmobile skidding violently across the ice, flipping it onto its side. Sven was thrown hard into the snow, his face buried in frost, his body jarred by the crash. Pain spread through his arms and legs as he scrambled to rise, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. The predator bore down on him, breath steaming in the cold, ready to strike. Sven clawed through the snow, dragging himself toward where his rifle had landed just beyond his reach. His gloves slipped against the frozen crust, every second bringing the predator closer. From several yards away, Eric dismounted and shouldered his .375 H&H rifle, steadying himself against the biting wind. He lined up his shot as the beast loomed over Sven. The crack of the weapon tore through the white silence, the heavy bullet striking the predator in the shoulder. The impact jolted the massive animal, and a roar echoed across the ice, vibrating through the ground itself. The polar bear staggered, but refused to leave. Instead, it circled the two men, limping but still fierce, its pale body blending into the endless storm. The hunters could barely track its movements as the snow thickened, the shadows shifting with every gust. The predator paused, its breath fogging the air before retreating slowly into the veil of white, its massive form swallowed by the haze. Shaking and breathless, the hunters stood frozen in the aftermath, their hearts pounding as the snow whipped across the broken ice. They knew it was not victory but survival by the thinnest margin. The wilderness had shown them its fury, and the frozen sea beneath their boots reminded them how close they had come to disaster. The storm pressed heavily around them as silence returned to the ice. Eric lowered his rifle, but his eyes kept scanning the fog in case the predator circled back. His hands trembled as the cold gnawed through his gloves. Sven lay on the ground, blood seeping through his coat from cuts made by the shards of the shattered snowmobile. His breath came in short bursts, mist rising into the air as he tried to steady himself. Both men knew the animal was still close, hidden somewhere beyond the haze, and that the danger had not truly ended. Sven struggled to sit up, his body stiff and sore. The snowmobile he had been riding was wrecked, lying on its side with pieces scattered across the ice. Fuel leaked slowly into the drifts, the smell sharp against the biting wind. Eric rushed to his companion and helped him crawl behind the remains of a broken sled for shelter. The two men stayed low, straining their ears for any sound of heavy paws crunching the snow. Minutes passed like hours until it became clear the predator had vanished into the storm. Still, the hunters knew they could not waste time. Eric tied a cloth around Sven's arm and shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. The frost bit harshly at their skin, threatening to make their wounds worse. The cold was now as much an enemy as the creature itself. With one snowmobile still working, Eric dragged what gear he could salvage and strapped it to the back. He helped Sven climb onto the machine, every movement heavy with pain. Together they set off slowly across the frozen land, the roar of the engine their only comfort in the desolate wilderness. Each bump in the ice jarred Sven's battered body, but he clung tightly, determined to hold on. After what felt like an eternity, faint lights flickered on the horizon. The pair reached a small outpost where other hunters rushed to their aid. Sven was carried inside, his wounds cleaned and wrapped in thick bandages. Eric sank onto a bench, exhausted, his rifle still clutched in his hands as if he feared letting it go. The warmth of the fire barely touched the chill that lingered in his bones. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the settlement. Locals listened in silence, some shaking their heads as they heard how close the two men had come to death. Guides reminded everyone that predators in the Arctic are cunning and fearless, especially when hunger drives them inland during storms. Even skilled hunters with strong weapons were at the mercy of the ice, the fog, and the immense strength of a starving giant. Sven survived, scarred and shaken but alive. Eric never forgot the sight of the beast fading into the haze, its shadow forever burned into his memory. For both men, the whiteout had revealed how small and fragile humans truly are in the Arctic, where nature rules with unrelenting power. In March 2025, the cold forests near the Talkeetna Mountains held a silence that seemed unbreakable. But inside a small hunting cabin, two hunters slept unaware of what was about to happen. The night was heavy with frost, the trees still and dark, and the air biting against the wooden walls. At around 3 a.m., that stillness shattered. A deep, ripping sound echoed as claws raked against the outer boards, pulling at the structure like paper. The wooden porch groaned under a weight no cabin was meant to bear. A 200-pound grizzly, drawn close by the hidden scent of stored game meat, crashed forward. Its bulk smashed through the porch planks, sending splinters flying. The door shuddered, hinges bending under its power before being shoved inward. The sudden burst of cold air swept through the cabin as the predator forced its way inside. Jack Nolan reached instinctively for his .338 Win Mag, hands shaking as the beast surged into the room. Sophie Hayes stumbled toward the pantry door, trying to lock it shut, her movements frantic in the chaos. Shadows leapt across the walls from the flickering lantern as the massive animal stormed into the cabin, its growls filling the cramped space. The grizzly swiped with terrifying strength, claws slicing through a chair and scattering shards across the floor. Packs, clothes, and gear were tossed aside like feathers as the predator smashed deeper into the cabin. In an instant, Jack was slammed backward, the weight of the impact knocking him hard to the floor. He felt searing pain tear across his shoulder as claws ripped through fabric and flesh. Blood splattered the wood, mixing with the debris that now covered the ground. Sophie turned, rifle raised, her breathing ragged. She fired point blank, the explosion of the shot filling the room, staggering the beast for a moment. The sound echoed through the walls, but the bear was not finished. Its rage only grew as it lunged forward again, crushing broken furniture beneath its paws. The predator loomed over Jack, nearly pinning him completely under its mass as he struggled to push away with his one good arm. Splintered wood, blood, and gear lay across every corner of the cabin as the struggle dragged on. Hours felt like minutes as the night stretched, each movement filled with raw survival. Exhausted and bleeding, the hunters realized the place they had trusted for safety was no true barrier at all. When a predator of this size decided to break in, even the strongest walls offered little defense. The grizzly pressed forward with its enormous frame, the floorboards creaking under its weight as the fight inside the cabin reached its peak. Jack, half-pinned and bleeding heavily from his torn shoulder, tried to lift his rifle, but the sheer weight of the predator made every movement weak. Sophie steadied her weapon, firing again with trembling hands. The blast filled the cabin, the recoil bruising her arm, but the shot struck true. The beast roared in rage, slamming against the pantry door and smashing more crates into splinters. The noise and chaos echoed through the lonely forest, but no one was near enough to hear. The predator thrashed inside the cabin, striking walls and breaking shelves as it staggered from its wounds. Jack crawled across the blood-streaked floor, dragging himself toward cover behind the broken table. Sophie reloaded quickly, her chest heaving as she tried to keep the weapon steady. Another lunge came, the bear crashing through the center of the room, knocking lanterns and tools in all directions. Flames sparked briefly from an overturned lantern before dying in the cold air. Jack gritted his teeth, pushing himself upright, refusing to give in. Sophie's next shot echoed again, slamming into the beast's side, forcing it to reel back. The predator clawed the wall, leaving long gouges before finally retreating toward the broken doorframe. Its growls faded as it dragged itself back into the night, leaving the cabin in ruins. Blood pooled across the floor, the smell of gunpowder and splintered wood thick in the air. Jack collapsed against the wall, clutching his shredded shoulder, his face pale with pain. Sophie rushed to his side, wrapping strips of torn fabric tight around the wound, trying to stop the steady flow. Hours passed in a haze. Every creak of the trees outside kept them tense, fearful of the beast's return. The cold seeped in through the torn walls, forcing them to huddle together for warmth, their bodies trembling not just from the air, but from the weight of what they had survived. The cabin, once their shelter, now looked like the site of a battlefield, its defenses shattered in minutes. When dawn finally broke, the pale light revealed the full destruction. Chairs crushed, crates torn open, and deep claw marks carved across the walls told the story of the night. Bloodstains marked the floor where Jack had been pinned. Their rifles lay empty on the splintered wood, silent reminders of how close the fight had come. Later, when help arrived, rescuers were shocked by the scene. Jack was carried out, weak but alive, while Sophie followed with her hands still shaking. Both were scarred inside and out, their trust in the wilderness forever changed. Guides and authorities who inspected the wreckage repeated a stark warning. Even fortified cabins, they said, were never true barriers when the largest predator of Alaska decided to test them. In October 2022, the stillness of Maine's North Woods was broken by the sound of boots pressing into the damp ground. Hunters Ethan Pierce and Clara Donovan had set out in search of a trophy moose, their weapons ready, one with a .300 Win mag and the other with a bow. The wide bog stretched before them, wet and heavy from early frost and the rain that had settled over the land in recent days. Mist clung to the ridges, making the forest look both beautiful and threatening at the same time. Ethan moved carefully, scanning the ridge ahead for signs of movement, his breath forming white clouds in the cool air. Each step seemed uncertain as the bog pulled at his boots, but the thrill of the hunt kept him pressing forward. Then through the gray fog, a massive bull moose emerged, its towering frame nearly filling the clearing. Its antlers caught the faint light, sharp and gleaming, giving it the look of a wild warrior standing guard over the swamp. The sudden sight of the animal startled Ethan. In his rush to steady himself, his foot slipped, and the ground gave way beneath him. Before he could react, he sank waist-deep into a hidden pit of mud, his arms flailing as he fought to keep hold of his rifle. Panic spread across his face as he realized he was trapped, unable to move his legs. The moose reacted at once, its instincts triggered by the sound and sudden movement. With a deep snort, the animal lowered its head and surged forward. Its hooves smashed into the ground, sending mud and water flying with every strike. Ethan felt the force shake the bog around him as the bull charged straight toward where he struggled. Clara raised her rifle in desperation and fired. The sharp crack echoed through the trees, and the bullet struck the moose in the shoulder. Another shot rang out, hitting the ribs, but the bull only staggered before turning back toward the man stuck in the mire. The huge body twisted with raw strength, its eyes locked on its target. In seconds, the animal was on him again, its massive weight pressing the bog deeper as it slammed against Ethan. Mud splashed over his chest, filling his clothes and nearly covering his arms. Gasping for air, he reached out and grabbed a branch half buried in the muck, clinging to it as the bull circled him. Snorts and stomps filled the air, each hoof pounding dangerously close to his sinking body. Clara kept firing, her eyes wide with fear, each shot a desperate attempt to stop the beast. The moose slowed, its breath heavy, foam at its mouth, but still it pawed the mud, refusing to back away. Ethan fought to keep his head above the wet earth, every second stretching longer than the last. Finally, the massive bull shuddered, staggered, and turned, retreating into the mist that had first hidden it. Soaked, bruised, and shaken to his core, Ethan pulled himself upright, his chest heaving as the fog closed once more around the swamp. The danger had passed, but the terror of those moments would stay carved into his memory. Ethan's arms trembled as he dragged himself out of the sucking bog, every muscle screaming from the effort. Clara hurried to his side, pulling with all her strength until he was free of the mire and sprawled on the wet ground. His clothes clung to him, soaked and heavy, streaked with mud that stank of rot. His chest heaved as he tried to calm his breath, the cold air biting against his skin. Clara checked quickly for wounds, relieved to see only bruises and scrapes on his arms, though the shock of being pressed under mud had left him weak and trembling. The forest around them had gone still, the only sound the dripping of water from branches and the faint echo of the moose crashing deeper into the fog. The ground bore the marks of the struggle, deep holes carved by hooves, churned mud splattered across broken reeds. It was clear how close the encounter had come to ending in disaster. Clara retrieved her pack, hands shaking as she dug out clothes and wrapped them around Ethan's arms to keep him warm. She had fired until the animal finally pulled back, but even then it had felt as though its power lingered in the air. Ethan pushed himself onto his knees, his body aching as if the bog itself had tried to crush him. He stared at the broken reeds where the animal had vanished, the image of towering antlers and pounding hooves still vivid in his mind. Each breath carried the taste of mud, sharp and sour, and each movement reminded him of how helpless he had been when pinned in the wet ground. Clara steadied him, guiding him toward firmer soil, her bow slung over her shoulder, her face pale but determined. As they gathered their scattered gear, the scale of the event sank in. The moose had been immense, its weight alone enough to trap him further in the bog, and its aggression had turned the swamp into a death trap. Clara had risked everything by firing at close range, the recoil slamming into her shoulder as she stood between the charging bull and her partner. Together they had survived, but the wilderness had shown just how quickly it could shift from calm to chaos. When they finally began the long walk back toward camp, the air felt heavier, every sound from the forest carrying new meaning. Twigs snapping in the distance set their nerves on edge. Shadows shifting in the fog made them grip their weapons tighter. Neither spoke, both too aware of how silence and instinct governed survival in this place. By the time they reached camp, Ethan was limping, his body stiff, his leg muscles bruised from being crushed in the muck. Clara built a fire, its warmth a fragile barrier against the damp cold that clung to the swamp. They cleaned mud from his arms and shoulders, the scratches raw but shallow. Still, the memory of hooves slamming into the ground beside him made his body jolt with every flicker of flame. Word of the attack would later spread among local guides, who pointed out that the terrain itself had trapped Ethan as much as the bull had endangered him. In the Maine North woods, bogs could swallow a man whole. and even the most skilled hunter could be undone by ground that gave way beneath his feet. The lesson was harsh but clear. The wilderness demanded respect, and sometimes the land could prove as unforgiving as the animals that lived upon it. In August 2025, the quiet stillness of a logging road in northern Maine was shattered in seconds when a black bear weighing nearly 400 pounds lunged from the darkness. Mason Reed and Olivia Hart had parked their truck and were setting up for a night hunt, the vehicle's bed filled with bait and supplies. The forest pressed close around them, shadows moving with the sway of the trees. Neither expected what came next. The scent of food had drifted far, and it pulled the predator straight toward them. Out of the gloom, the animal charged, climbing onto the tailgate with startling force. The truck shook violently as claws tore into metal. In an instant, it smashed through the rear cab window, shards of glass raining across the seats. The quiet of the road was replaced by growls and the crack of breaking upholstery. Mason, sitting near the steering wheel, braced himself as the predator forced its way inside. He tried to shove it back, but the strength of the beast was overwhelming. Its claws raked across his chest, ripping through fabric and flesh, while the weight of the blow slammed his arm into the steering wheel, sending waves of pain through his body. Olivia reacted with raw instinct. Raising her firearm, she fired a shot at point-blank range into the bear's shoulder. The roar of the gun echoed in the night, and the animal staggered backward, retreating out of the shattered window. Smoke and the sharp smell of gunpowder filled the cab, but relief was short-lived. Within seconds, the predator came again, smashing against the vehicle, forcing its head and body inside once more. The second attack was even more savage. It clawed at the seats, scattering bags and gear, snapping at the air just inches from their faces. Mason tried again to fight it off, his blood soaking into the cushions, his breath ragged and heavy. Olivia struggled to reload, her hands shaking as the bear's growls filled the cab. A second gunshot rang out, striking the beast and sending it reeling back again. For a moment, silence returned, but the night was not done. The animal stormed the truck a third time, furious and relentless. Glass shattered further, pieces falling into their laps, while coolers, jackets, and weapons were flung around by the thrashing claws. Mason was slumped against the door, bleeding heavily now, his gasps shallow and broken. Olivia held her ground, firing again, the muzzle flash lighting up the dark cab. Finally, the predator recoiled, growling low as it backed away. The sound of heavy steps faded into the trees until the forest was quiet once more. Inside the ruined vehicle, blood mixed with glass and scattered gear. Both sat frozen, their bodies shaking, their minds stunned by how close they had come to death. What had begun as a simple night hunt had turned into a battle for survival inside the cramped steel shell of their truck. The cab was silent once the predator vanished into the trees, but the wreckage around them showed the cost of the assault. Blood stained the seats, and shards of glass clung to every surface. Mason leaned against the door, his chest rising in shallow motions, his shirt soaked in red. Olivia tore strips from a jacket and pressed them hard against his wounds, her hands trembling as she tried to slow the steady flow. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air, mixed with the iron scent of blood and the musk left behind by the animal. Every sound from the forest made them flinch. The crack of a branch or the rush of wind through the pines felt like a warning that the creature might return. They knew they could not stay where they were. With the windows shattered and the truck badly damaged, it was no longer a safe shelter. Olivia climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and steered slowly down the gravel road, every bump sending pain through Mason's battered body. After what felt like endless miles, the glow of a ranger station appeared through the darkness. Olivia pulled in, honking the horn to call for help. Rangers rushed out, pulling Mason from the vehicle and laying him on a stretcher. Bandages were wrapped tightly around his chest and arm before he was loaded into an emergency truck bound for the nearest hospital. Olivia followed, still shaking, her clothes stained with blood and her mind locked on the memory of claws just inches from her face. Doctors worked through the night to treat Mason's injuries. The cuts across his chest required dozens of stitches, and his arm was splinted where bones had cracked against the steering wheel. Though his breathing was shallow, he survived, scarred, but alive. Olivia remained by his side, replaying the chaos of the night in her mind. News of the attack spread quickly, sending shock through nearby towns. Officials reminded hunters and campers that even black bears, often seen as less dangerous than grizzlies, can become deadly when drawn by food or cornered. They warned that a truck, no matter how sturdy, is no guarantee of safety against a determined predator. For Mason and Olivia, the night would never be forgotten. The shattered glass, the echo of roars, and the desperate fight inside that cab became memories carved into their lives forever.